How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf. Well, holy shnikes. Today we're studying Daf. No. Okay, right. Here's the thing. So today we're studying Daf Tes of Masechta BavaMetzia, but we mamish have to do half of Daf Ches. They're just. Yeah, dude, BavaMetzia, I'm like struggling to keep up. It's like just like Bava Kama. I was like struggling to keep up. I'm like mom is struggling to keep up over here. Anyways, yesterday we only really did Daf Ches Amud Aleph, but that took 45 minutes just to do Daf Ches Amud Aleph, and then we start now. Really, this is a sugya that really takes us pretty much to the Mishnah and Daf Tes Amud Beis. So I think that's what I'm going to do, and then I have to. Dude, this stuff is crazy. And then I guess tomorrow the plan would be to do all of Daf Yud until Yud Aleph. I think Yud Aleph is a little bit easier, maybe, or not. I can't remember what's what. This stuff is nuts, absolutely nuts. But okay, hopefully this Daf won't be so hard. The first time I learned it, I thought it was really hard, but then when I was reviewing it, it actually turned out not to be that hard. I can't tell. So. Anyways, we're going to start on Daf Ches Amud Aleph, all the way at the bottom, the last line of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, but today's Daf really is officially Daf Tes. So here we go. Okay, so the Mishnah had been talking about if you have two people riding on a donkey and they both claim it's, or on an animal, they both claim it's theirs. Alright, so they split it and they swear. Omer of Yosef, it says of Yosef, Omer of Yehuda. The Yehuda said to me, okay, Shmos Minei de Shmuel. I heard from Shmuel. It's 3 generations right there, right? Shmuel, or let's say this, Rav Yosef was a student of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was a student of Shmuel. So Rav Yosef says that Rav Yehuda said to him that Rav Yehuda heard from Shmuel, Tarte. 2 things. Riding and leading. Did we get to this at the end yesterday? I can't remember. Riding and leading. Okay. Riding and leading. So if you have an animal, you could ride an animal. You can lead an animal. Like, I don't know, I guess you have like the reins of the animal or something and like you like lead it. Chad koni v'chad lo koni. One of them is kone. The other is not. Okay? Where am I? Chad koni v'chad lo koni. V'lo yadayna heiminayu. And says, Shmuel, I'm not sure which is the one that's kone and which is the one that isn't. Eichidami, what's the case? Ilema rachuv l'chudei umanig l'chudei. Well, if we're talking about in a vacuum, somebody riding an animal, is he kone or not? Versus if somebody were to be, leading, pulling the animal, would he be kone? Well, then there's no question. That's obvious, right? Kinyan Mashicha. Obviously, right? Meaning, if Rav Yehuda is saying, I'm not sure, if somebody's riding an animal versus if somebody were to be pulling an animal, one of them's kone, one of them isn't, and I'm not sure which one. What do you mean you're not sure which one? Obviously, the one who's pulling the animal would be kone, right? Pulling the animal is definitely going to be kone, so if it's only going to be one of them, it's going to have to be that. It's a Kinyan Mashicha. Right? So, ilem rochov l'chudei, manig l'chudei, mi'ika mandaomer lo kani. I don't understand. When it comes to somebody schlepping an animal, is there anybody who would say that he would not be kone? Obviously he would be kone. It's kinyan Mashicha. Elo, mi'ika lemeimar de lo kani, rochiv hu de'ika lemeimar. And therefore in that context, if it's one of them who would not be kone, it would be the rider, the one riding an animal, as opposed to one who is pulling an animal. Rather, you have, right, it says Rashi, El Rachav bimkom manig, Shneim boyim lefonenu, ze Rachav v'ze manig, ze omer kula shali, v'ze omer kula shali, omer shmuel chad koni, mi boy le Rav Yehuda, heicha de isnu tarvayu, hei adav, Rachav adav, deha tafiz ba, v'chi amiron, mishicha koni eicha de lo, de leka Rachav, Aval b'makom rochuv lo. Odum amanig odif dikoaz lamachmase b'hi agdola bekinyan. Right. So it's talking about a scenario where you have one guy is riding the animal, the other guy is pulling the animal. It's like like a horseback ride. Like when they just pull the horse kind of thing. So you have these people, let's call them Reuven and Shimon, and they come to Bezdin, and one of them is riding the animal, the other one's pulling the animal, and so one of them is Kona, the other one isn't. And the shaila is, who's the one who's Kona? Okay. So El Rochav Bimkom Manig Iboyele. My. What do we say? Do we say Rochav Adiv Diha Tafisba? Do we say, well, the guy who's riding the animal is the one who's Kona because he's on it. He's showing who's boy. He's got the animal. It's his. He's riding on it. Or maybe it's the one who's pulling it who makes the kinyan because he's the one who's making it move. He's the one who's pulling it. And as Rashi points out, via gedola bekinyan. Right? A kinyan, when it comes to kinyanim, so he's making a kinyan. He's a kinyan meshicha. So is it the rider who's owning it, or is it the puller who's owning it? Omer of Yosef, and says of Yosef, Amali, Rav Yehuda, that Rav Yehuda said to me, Rav Yosef, Nechzeunan, let's see. Ditnan, that we learn in a Mishnah, if I understand correctly, it's talking about the inyan of los sachrosh b'shor v'chomer yachtav. That you can't, I think that be'etzim it comes from from this halacha of you can't plow with an ox and a donkey together because they plow at different paces, and you can't have them plowing together. It's going to make a mess. You have to have two oxen or two donkeys. You can't have one ox and one donkey. And I think the point is that we then apply this also to like pulling a carriage. If you have a guy and he's riding in a carriage and it's being pulled by an ox and a donkey, so that's not allowed. So we learn in the Mishnah, Hamanig. So in this scenario with the ox and the donkey pulling the carriage, Hamanig Sofig Esoaboyim, the one who's leading it, who's pulling them, the puller is going to be the one who gets makis. Vayoshev Bakarin Sofig Esoaboyim, and Oichit, the one who's poshit sitting in the wagon, Oichit gets makis. So both of them are being problematic. Rav Meir Poter Sayoshev Bekarin, whereas Rav Meir says that the one sitting in the carriage is Take Poter. He's Poter, he's not doing anything, he's just sitting. So only the one who's pulling it is going to be Chayev. Umida Apich Shmuel Betani Bachachomim Poter Mesayoshev Bekarin Shmamina Rochuv Lichudei Lo Koni V'chol Shekain Rochuv Binkom Manik. Okay? So now Shmuel, right? So we just had this Mishnah that talks about you have an ox and a donkey that are pulling a carriage, and you have a guy sitting in the carriage, and you have a guy pulling the ox and the donkey. So initially we said that according to the Tanakama, both of them are chayiv, both the guy sitting in the carriage as well as the guy pulling the ox and the donkey. But and Reb Meir says that only the one pulling is chayiv, the one sitting in the carriage is potter. And Shmuel, remember Shmuel is the one whose opinion we are exploring, right? Shmuel, who says that either the rachuv, the rider, or the puller is going to be konem, we're not sure which one. So Shmuel actually flips around this Mishnah and says actually it's the opinion of the Chachomim that only the puller is going to be chayiv, but the guy sitting in the carriage is going to be potter. So we see, says Rav, it says the Gemara, and the apich Shmuel v'tani, and from the fact that Shmuel takes this Mishnah and flips it around to make it the opinion of the rabbis, v'tani v'chachamim potrin es hayoshev bakarun, that he makes it the opinion of the rabbis that the one pulling is going to be chayiv and the one riding is going to be potter. So we see where Shmuel's head is at. Shmuel's head is at that the majority opinion is that it is the puller that's going to be chayiv, the sitter is going to be potter, and therefore if we apply this to kinyonim as well, somebody, so it's the person who is pulling the animal is the one who's going to be koneit, the one sitting on the animal is not going to be koneit. Shmamina. So we see rachuv lichude lo kani, that riding alone is not going to be kone. V'chol shekein rachuv b'mkom manig, and certainly, if riding alone won't be kone, but pulling alone is kone, well then certainly when you have a rider and a puller, it's the puller who's going to be the one who's kone and not the rider. Okay, fine. So we see, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? That was Rabbi Yehuda said that, right? Yeah. That meaning, well, but really, what we see is that when Shmuel says that either the rider or the puller is going to be chayiv, and we're not sure which one, well, it's is going to be kone. Either the rider or the puller is going to be kone. Well, it's going to be the puller, not the rider. This we learned from the ox and the donkey scenario. Abaye le Rav Yosef. Now Abaye says to Rav Yosef, I have a question for you. Hazimnin sagiyin omart lon nechze onon velo omart lon mishmei Rav Yehuda. Says Abaye to Rav Yosef, but wait a minute. You have told us this sugya before in the past, and you did not say that it was Rav Yehuda who had said, hey, let's look at this Mishnah from Kilayim about the shor and the chomer. You had said that, you had said, let's analyze this, right? Or meaning, I don't know, or more, I'm not exactly sure in to what detail, extent Rav Yosef had said, but Abaye is saying, look, I've heard you say, I guess, this sugya before, and I didn't hear you quote Rav Yehuda. You would just say nechze onan, let us see, i.e. Rav Yosef was saying this without mentioning Rav Yehuda. Amar le Ibra. So Rav Yosef says it's true. Yes, I have mentioned this without quoting Rav Yehuda. V'dachar no nami de amri le, and he says, yeah, look, because I actually also did have a role here as well, that I had said heichi poshit mar rachuv mi Yosef, that I had then pushed Rav Yehuda with a question, and I had said, wait, but Rav Yehuda, you're trying to make a conclusion with regard to Shmuel, that Shmuel had said, well, either Rachuv or Manig is making a kinyan, and Shmuel says that he's not sure if it's Rachuv or Manig. Rav Yehuda is saying, well, we have this Mishnah from Kilayim about the shor and the chomer, and we say that the Yoshev is potter. So Rav Yehuda wanted to say, from the fact that the Yoshev is potter, then the Rachuv is not kone. The thing is, Rav Yosef asks Rav Yehuda, Yoshev is different than Rachuv. Yoshev is just sitting there sipping pina colada, and the Rachuv, I guess, is at least holding the reins, doing epis. I don't know, he's a little bit more active than, I guess, just sitting there and drinking pina coladas in the carriage. Yoshev lo tofes b'mosera, there you go. Right? Somebody who's sitting there is not holding on to the reins. He's holding on to a pina colada. Rachuv tofes b'mosera. Whereas somebody who's riding an animal is holding on to the reins, so it's more active in what's going on with the animal. So therefore Rav Yosef says that he inquired to Rav Yehuda. He says, why are you so sure that we can learn out Rachuv from Yoshev. Yoshev is less active than Rachuv, and therefore I can understand why Yoshev would be Potter, but maybe Rachuv would be Kona in our case. Ve'omar li, and Rav Yehuda said to me, to Rav Yosef, Rav Shmuel Damar Tarvayu, that Rav and Shmuel both say, Moseira lo Koni. That the Moseira, the reins, I think it's the reins, or is it the brittle? Maybe it's the brittle? The brittle, maybe? Yeah, what's a brittle? Yeah, maybe the brittle. Yeah, like the brittle. You know what a brittle is? Am I even saying it right? Brittle, bridle? I'm not sure. I'm just going to say brittle. Bridle? Brittle? Bridle? I don't know. I'm going to say brittle. That's what I'm going to do. The brittle is like that thing that goes like around like the head of like a horse. You know what I'm talking about? Look it up. And then you can, I guess, like pull it. All right. That is, and so the brittle, bridle? I don't know. The brittle is bridle? The bridle? Nah, come on, brittle. I feel like neither one's right. It's probably spelled wrong. All right, brittle, why not? Moser lo kani. The brittle makes no difference. Okay? And therefore, if the Yoshev is potter, so then the Rachuv will not be kani. Ikadamri, there are those who say, Omle Abai of Yosef, that Abai says to Rav Yosef, Heichi poshit mar Rachuv mi Yosef, that Abai had said to Rav Yosef, how can you learn out Rachuv from Yosef? Yosef lo taviz b'moser, Rachuv taviz b'moser, that the fellow who's sitting there is not holding on to the bridle possibly, whereas the fellow who is Rachuv is holding on to the bridle, possibly bridle. Omarle hochi tana idi. So Rav Yosef responds to Abai, well, this is what Idi taught. Moseira lo kani. The bridle, possibly bridle, is not kona. Is not kona, and it makes no difference. Itmanami was also stated. Amr b'chelbo, Amr b'huna, Moseira mechavero kona. So when it comes to kinyonim, when it comes to mekachumimkar, holding on to the brittle or possibly bridle, we'll make a kinyan. We'll make a kinyan over there. Okay, so that can affect a kinyan. All right, fine. And I guess that they must. Okay, so by a kinyan, kinyan mesira, okay, I understand. I think that if the person who is, so if Shimon's kind of like selling an animal to Ruvain, and then he gives over the brittle or bridle to Ruvain, and Ruvain takes it, so now we make a kinyan. But by BavaMetzia v'nichse ager, but by if you find epis and then just take hold of the bridle, uv'nichse ager, or by the property of a proselyte who passes away and doesn't have any heirs, and then all of his property becomes hefker, and there's an animal, and the animal has a bridle, possibly a bridle, and he takes the bridle or maybe bridle. That would not make a kinyan. I imagine you probably have to do like a meshicha or something. Okay, fine. Where am I? Lo kani. So okay, so therefore this just taking, I guess, the bridle thing by metzia, by finding epis, doesn't make a kinyan. My lashon moseira. What's pshat with the moseira? What does moseira? What's this lashon of this moseira brittle thing? Rava Idi Asberli says, Rava Idi explain to me, like somebody who's giving over something, right? Shimon's giving his cow to Ruvain, and he says, here, I'm giving my cow to you, take this moseira, take this brittle. So I understand why by a kinyan, by mekach umemker, it would make a kinyan, because if Shimon is is being makne his cow to Reuven, and he says, "Hey Reuven, here, take the animal by the bridle," so then Shimon, by doing so, he's saying, "Here, Reuven, take it." But by Metzia, or by Nichse Ager, where he's just running up and grabbing the animal, who's giving it to him? Nobody's giving anything to him. So if it's not enough to just grab it by the bridle, I guess I imagine though if he pulls it and does a kin meshicha, I imagine that at that point it's probably his. I imagine. Meisve, we have a kasha. Hayu shnayim reichivin al gabe behema v'chulei. Oh, okay, so now we have a kasha. Okay, givaldig. Okay, so we want to say that according to Shmuel, right, one of them makes a kinyan, one of them doesn't. Either the pulling or the rachuv, or the riding, makes a kinyan. We want to say that it's the pulling that makes a kinyan, the riding does not make a kinyan. Meisir, we have a kasha, however. Our Mishnah says, Hayishnaim rochvin al gabe behema v'chulei. Our Mishnah talks about you have two people riding an animal. They're rachuv on the animal, and it can even be a scenario where one of them is riding it, one of them is pulling it, and both of them claim that the animal is theirs, and we say that they split it and they swear. We don't say it belongs to the person pulling it and not to the one riding it. We say they split it. Now, remember, Shmuel had flipped around that Mishnah from Kilaim, so we're still going to work with Shmuel's flipping around, that it's the opinion of the rabbis that by the shor and the chamor, the puller is chayev, the rider is potter, and Reb Meir would say that both the puller and the rider are chayev. So, money, who is the author of our Mishnah? Now, of course, we had said earlier that a rider is kind of a bit more significant than a sitter, than a yoshev, right? A rachuv is a little bit more than a yoshev. A yoshev is just sitting there doing nothing. Rachuv is at least holding on to the bridle. So, Ilim Reb Meir, if we want to say that our Mishnah is Reb Meir, well, that obviously can't be Reb Meir. Hashta Yoshev Kani, that if according to Reb Meir, the Yoshev is Kani? The Yoshev is Kani? Wait, what? Wait, 1 second. Yeah, wait, what? Yeah, exactly. Well, I have no clue what I just said a minute ago. Sorry. It gets confusing when you have a Mishnah with a Tanakama and Reb Meir, and then you flip around their opinion, and you have to remember who says what. I have no clue what I just said a minute ago. Once we flipped it around, like Shmuel, right? So the Tanakama's opinion is that you're going to, right, that the puller is going to be chayiv, the sitter is going to be potter, right? Reb Meir's opinion is that both the puller and the sitter are going to be chayiv. Okay? Reb Meir's opinion is that both the puller and the sitter are going to be chayiv, and therefore, if by kilayim, by the shor and the chomer, the sitter is chayiv, and that he's just sitting there, he's going to be chayiv, then certainly rachuv, which is at least he's holding the bridle. So in terms of kinyonim, of course he's going to make a kinyan. We don't need our Mishnah to tell me that if you have a guy who's a rachuv on the animal and a guy who's pulling the animal, that they would split it. Obviously, Reb Meir even says sitting and doing nothing is enough to be chayiv, and therefore in the case of a kinyan, it would be enough to make a kinyan. Obviously, rachuv would make a kinyan, so rather, elav rabbanon. Rather, it must be that the Mishnah is necessary for the rabbis, that even though the rabbis say that somebody who's sitting there in the context of kilayim would be potter from kilayim, but in terms of making a kinyan, rachuv, however, which is a little bit more, he's holding the bridle, would make a kinyan. So this Mishnah is according to the rabbis, and we're saying, even according to the rabbis who say that Yoshev would be potter by kilayim, they say that rachuv right? Because they're the authors of our Mishnah. Rachov would make a kinyan. So how are we saying that according to Shmuel, Rachov would not make a kinyan? It sounds like Rachov would make a kinyan. So Elav Rabbanim v'Shmamina Rachov Kani. So we see that Rachov from our Mishnah, Yushnaim Rochavin, Rachov makes a kinyan. So answer to Gemara, not necessarily. When it says Rachov in our Mishnah, it doesn't actually mean Rachov. Or at least not sort of a standard Rachov that you would imagine just kind of like riding it and holding onto a brittle. Hochav mayaskinon bimanig biraglov. Anybody ever been horseback riding? Anybody ever been horseback riding? You like sit on the horse? I haven't gone horseback riding in many, many years. If I remember correctly, you like sit on the horse and you like give it like a kick, right? And then when you give it a kick, it kind of moves forward. So that's a little bit different than just kind of sitting on that's a little bit different than like, the little kids when they go on the pony and somebody's pulling the pony around and the kid is just sitting on the pony doing nothing. When you go horseback riding, you give it a little kick and then it moves forward. So in that case, it's actually a type of manig. It's a type of pulling, and that is what the Mishnah is talking about. So when Shmuel says that Rachov does not make a kinyan, that's talking about when you're basically just sitting on the animal and holding the bridle. When our Mishnah says that Rachov would make a kinyan, that's talking about where he's moving the animal. He's doing he's causing it to move. At least I think the point is like, and therefore it should be treated similarly to how the manig himself would be treated, pulling the animal or riding the animal and kicking it and moving it that way seems like a similar type of thing. If that's the case, hainu manig. But then Rachov should be the same thing as manig, or is the same thing as manig. How can we have our Mishnah say, that echad Rachov ve'echad manig, as if they're two separate things? At the end of the day, they're both the same thing. The manig is making it move, the Rachov is making it move, so what's the difference? Trei gavnei manig. There's two types of manig, there's two types of way you can make the animal move. You could pull it and it can move that way, or you can sit on it and give it a kick and move it that way. Now the Tema Itaka may have thought, Rachov odif to manig vitafus bo. I may have thought that Take Rachov should be fancier than manig, because manig, you're just pulling it. Rachov, not right to make it move. Rachov, not only are you making it move, you're also showing ownership. You're on it, you're sitting on it. Kamash malon nisht, that they both have equal claims to the animal. They have to split it 50-50 and make a shvui. Okay. So Rav Yehuda is saying that when Shmuel says that Rachov does not make a kinyan, that's kind of regular, just riding on it. But if when our Mishnah talks about where it makes a kinyan, because it's doing more than just sitting on it, it's making it move. Toshma, come in here. Shnayim shahoyu moshchin bigamol umanhigin bechomer. Okay. Two people were pulling a camel or leading a donkey. So I've been saying up until now, I guess that manig is pulling. Maybe that's not right. Sorry, it's very detailed. The concept is similar, right? Manig would be like causing it to move, either by calling it, or like maybe giving it a shtickle knack with a stick or something. Meshich would be mamish pulling it, okay? But either way, even manig, it's right. It's getting it to move, right? So whether you have Rachov, the guy who's sitting on it and giving it a kick and making it move, or whether he's manig because he's kind of like whistling to it, or like giving it a shtickle hit, or whether you're moshech, whether you're mamish pulling it, all kind of making it move. But I guess moshech, pulling it is a bit more. I think maybe. So Tashma Shnayim show you moshchin begamol. So if you're pulling two people pulling a camel, manigin b'chomer, or they're like leading a donkey, or one of them was pulling and one of them was leading. Kanu, in this way they make a kinyan. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, La'olam lo kana ad shetei meshicha begamol v'anhaga b'chomer. That the only, the way to make a kinyan is specific. You have to pull a camel or lead a donkey. There's no leading camels and pulling donkeys. You have to pull a camel and lead a donkey. Katoni mias. But it teaches, we just learned, O shahaya echad moshech ve'echad manig. We just davka mentioned, by the camel and by the donkey, we mentioned meshicha, that you can pull it. Manig, we mentioned that you can lead it. Moshech u'manig in, pulling, leading. Aval, rachuv, low, but not riding. Not riding. Riding does not make a kinyan. Rachuv does not make a kinyan. So this would seem in line with what Rav Yehuda says, that the riding would not be, that just plain old riding would not make a kinyan. So the Gemara says, no, hu adin tafilu rachuv. No, rachuv, you can say that rachuv also makes a kinyan. For the katoni moshech umanig, the reason why Davka mentioned pulling and leading, lafuke mid Rabbi Yehuda, to the exclusion of Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar, who said, Ajite meshicha begamol v'anhaga b'chomer. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, you Davka need to pull the camel, to lead the donkey. Kamashman, Tanakam is not necessarily. Afilu ipcha, even if it was the opposite, afilu ipcha nami, even if it was the opposite, koni, you would still be kona, even if you pulled the donkey or led the camel, that's still fine. Yachi, but if that's the case, then you can do either way. Then just teach it all together. Shnayim shahayu moshchin umanigin bein begamol bein bechomer. That so if that's the case, that really you could do it either way. That you can pull a donkey, you can lead a camel. Well, if that's the case, well then just teach it all together. That if you have two people who were pulling or leading, whether a camel or a donkey, they're kone. So says the Gemara, Ika chad tzad delo koni. So actually, it's actually they aren't interchangeable. You can't just You can't necessarily just lead a camel or pull a donkey. One of them doesn't work. Those who say, yeah, pulling a donkey is not going to work to make a kinyan. Those who say that leading a camel is not going to make a kinyan. Those who ask the kasha from the Seifa, when it said right that the Tanakhama says in this way it makes a kinyan. In this way, to the exclusion of what? Lav lemute rachuv. Is it not to exclude rachuv, to say that rachuv does not make a kinyan, like Rav Yehuda says? Lo lemute ipcha. No, to the exclusion of the opposite. That it has to be mishicha with a gamol and hanhoga, right, leading with a donkey. If that's the case, Hani Rabbi Yehuda. But if that's the case, then that's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that it has to be exact, that you have to pull a camel or lead a donkey. Ike ben Ayu, the nafkamina is tzad echad delo kona. That according to the Tanakama, one of them is not right. One of them, I guess, is going to work, and one of them is not going to work. Is the Amir Meshicha b'chomer. Those who say that pulling a donkey does not work. V'gidami hanoga b'gamo. Those who say that leading a camel does not work. Tashma coming here. Echad rochuv chomer v'echad tofus b'moseir. Okay, you have somebody is riding a donkey. Okay, sounds like fun. V'echad tofus b'moseira, and somebody else is pulling is holding on to the brittle. Okay. Zeh kona chomer v'zeh kona mosera. So the guy riding the donkey is kona the donkey, and the guy holding the brittle is kona the brittle. Shmamino rachuv koni. So we see that rachuv is kani, right? We said again. Rachuv chomer v'echad tovus b'moser. Zeh kona chomer v'zeh kona mosera. Ha ha. Shmamino rachuv kani. Ha ha. So we see that rachuv taka does make a kinyan. Ooh. Taka kasha on Rav Yehuda, who explains that according to Shmuel, rachuv would not make a kinyan. Ooh. No, it's talking about what does rachuv mean? It means he's giving it a kick and he's causing it to move that way. If that's the case, nikne nami rachuv b'mosera. Well, okay. So now the Gemara asks if I think that this is not necessarily related specifically to like the kicking but like I think if he makes a kinyan on the donkey, well then shouldn't he also make a kinyan on the brittle? Chavi, you looked up what a brittle is on the internet, on Google or whatever. Look, you found a picture. A brittle is like the thing that goes around the head of the animal, like a horse or whatever. So if he's kona, or I guess a donkey, so if he's kona the donkey, should oichit be kona the brittle, which is around the head of the donkey. Then the guy on the donkey should oichit be kona the brittle. Ema ze kona chomer v'chatzi mosera v'ze kona chatzi mosera. Okay, so rather say this. So the guy riding the camel, the guy riding the donkey and giving it a kick, so he's kona the donkey. Now the brittle, which is on the donkey, so he has a claim to it, but so does the person who's holding on to the brittle. So therefore they split that. Okay, so the guy who's riding the donkey would get the donkey and half of the brittle, and the guy who's holding on to the brittle would only get half of the brittle. So then I understand why the guy who's riding the donkey would be kone the brittle, because it is being held on the other side by a bendas, by the guy who's holding the brittle. But the guy who's holding the brittle, what is it being koneh, right? It has to do, I think it was yesterday, right, that we had this discussion about the two people picking it up, and he picks it up for himself, but also for the other person, because you have to pick up an entire object, and it can't be treated like it's just lying on the floor. So it's that, well, each person, when he picks it up, he picks up his part, but also the other person's part, so it's being picked up entirely. And that's how they can each be kona half. But in this scenario, so I understand the guy riding the donkey, so he's riding the donkey, makes a kinyan on the donkey, and the brittle is around the head of the donkey, so he's also making a claim to that. But so is the guy who's holding the brittle. Now the guy who's holding the brittle, so in terms of like, both of them needing to, I guess, hold this brittle, I don't know, I guess the person on the donkey is making a kinyan on the brittle because he's riding it and being kona the donkey, and Memele, I guess he's kona the brittle, I guess. And in terms of the other half of it, that the guy with the brittle is like making a claim to, well, he's holding the other half, so I guess, I don't know, the interesting thing is like the guy on the donkey isn't really making a kinyan hadbah, I guess, but he's just being kona the donkey and the thing that's on it. So, but either way, I guess the assumption is that he would have to be able to make claim to the whole thing, and the part that the other guy has can't be considered like it's on the floor or whatever. But in that case, the guy with the brittle is holding it. But in terms of the guy with the brittle, he's holding his part, but who's holding the other part? There's nobody holding the other part. It's on the head of the animal. So how can he be kona half of it? So rather I'll say zeh kona chomer v'chule mosera. So rather I'll say that actually the guy in the donkey is kona the donkey, as well as the entire brittle, because it's like on the head of the donkey, and he's kona with the donkey. And the guy with the brittle will only get the part of the brittle that's in his hands. But 1 second. In terms of, somebody who picks up, because I think the point is, I don't know, what's the point? Is that, well, somebody who picks up a Metzia, right? So if you have Shnai Merchs and Batalis, right? So you both they both pick it up. So they're each Kona their own half, and then they can also be kind of Kona the other part for the other person. Okay. And therefore, I guess, yeah, okay. Right, so okay. So I guess if you want, okay, I guess, maybe, I don't know, maybe I understand it, maybe I don't. But like, the guy riding the animal, he's Kona the animal, and also the brittle, but he's only able to be Kona the whole brittle because the guy who's holding, right, because we said that the guy who's holding the brittle is a Ben Das, and he picks up the brittle, and therefore he's like also picking up that part. So like, the guy riding the donkey is able to make the kinyan on the brittle because the brittle is like around the head of the horse. And in terms of the part that like the guy holding the brittle is holding, well, right. So because the guy with the brittle is holding the brittle, so he's a bendas, and it's not considered like it's on the floor, and therefore he's coned that part. So then it's not considered like it's just like on the floor. But the thing is, the whole thing about being like being makna part of something to somebody else assumes that he could be kona it himself, but we're saying that the guy with the brittle actually can't actually be kona anything because like nobody else has the other part from his perspective or something like that. So in the scenario where somebody who picks up a metzia for his friend, so his friend is kona it, that's only where it picks it up for his friend. But I think that we're saying that the guy with the brittle is picking it up for himself, but he can't actually be kone it for himself, I guess because there's nobody holding it on the other side from his perspective. So how could he be makne it to the guy on the donkey? Rashi says, okay, so rather, says Rav Ashi, what happens is the guy with the donkey is kona the donkey, and he's also kona the part of the brittle that's around the head of the donkey, because I think that's considered like part of the donkey. So he's kona the donkey, he's kona the brittle that's around the head of the donkey, because that's part of the donkey. And then the guy with the brittle, so he only gets the part of the brittle that he's like actually holding, I guess. And then the rest of it, lo kana lo zeh v'lo zeh. Nobody gets the rest of it. Rather, it's like we said initially that they would that the guy with the donkey would get the donkey, and the guy with the brittle would get the brittle. Right? Is that what we initially had said? I think so. Yeah. The guy with the donkey gets the donkey, and the guy with the brittle gets the brittle. Since the guy with the brittle would be able to like give it a yank, and then it would go flying off the head of the donkey, and he would get it. But that which Rabbahu says is not acceptable. The ilotema achi, because if you don't say this, if you say it's acceptable, then that would be problematic. Because talis shimunachas chetzi al gabi karka v'chetzi al gabi amud, a talis that is half on the ground and half on a beam, uva echod. And somebody came and picked up the part off the ground, and the one who picks it up, and then somebody else afterwards comes and picks it up off the beam, then you'd have to say that the first one is kona and the second one isn't. Since he could give it a yank and bring it towards him, rather that which Rabbahu says is not acceptable. Meaning, the whole inyan, maybe we'll read it back inside in a second, but the whole inyan of Rabbahu was that, well, since the guy with the brittle would be able to give it a yank and it would go flying towards him, so that would be considered like he had picked up the whole thing, right? Meaning, if he like had it on if like part of it he picked up, but part of it was still on the ground, so that wouldn't work. But if in this case the brittle's on the head of the donkey, so it's not exactly on the ground, and he can give it a yank and it would come flying towards him. So in one yank he can like it'll come to him. So therefore that would be considered like a proper agbah, and therefore he could be kona all of it. The problem with that logic, right, meaning the idea being that, so if you pick up part of it but the other part of it is on the floor, that wouldn't work. But if you pick up part of it and the other part of it is like elevated, such that you can give it a yank and it will come flying towards you, so then you can be kona it. But the problem with that logic is that, say you have a talus, part of it is on the floor, and part of it is on some kind of a beam. So now if you come and you pick up the part from the floor, and the other part of it is on the beam, so it's elevated such that you'd be able to give it a yank. Once you picked it up the floor, you'd be able to give it a yank and bring it towards you, so then you should be kona it, which would mean then that if you pick up the part of the talus off the ground, you're then memele kona the talus. If somebody else would then come and pick up the talus off of that beam, it would be too late, because the guy who picked it up off the floor was already kona it, because he can give it a yank. Which would mean in that scenario, the second guy would not be kona, only the first guy would be kona it. But we hadn't said that. We didn't say that anywhere. So from the fact that we didn't say it anywhere, it must be that isn't actually the case. And this whole yanking inyan, it seems to be not really an inyan. Should we read that again? Sure, why not? Back up a few lines. V'hadra babo barusahi, that which Babo said about being able to yank the brittle is not really acceptable. The lotemachi, because if you don't say this, if you say that yanking the brittle is a thing, well then talus shimunachas chetzi al gabi karka v'chetzi al gabi amud. If you have a talus which is resting on, half of it's on the ground, but half of it is on a beam, and then somebody comes and picks up the part that's on the ground, so now he's picking it up, and the other part is on top of the beam such that you can give it a yank and it'll come flying towards you. And if we're saying that, then that means that the person who picked it up off the ground is now kona it. Well then, if somebody then subsequently comes and picks up the other half from on top of the beam, meaning it wasn't yanked yet, so we should say that the first person who picked it up off the ground would be kona the talus, but the person who picked it up off the beam was too late and he's not kona it. Since the first guy would be able to give it a yank and bring it towards him. But we don't say that anywhere. Rather, that which Babo says is not acceptable. Toshma, comment here. Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer, Rachuv basode umanig ba'ir kana. La 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 la. Okay, so it says Rabbi Eliezer that if you are riding on an animal in the field, okay, that's like a normal thing to do. You're in a field, you're riding an animal, you are kona. Umanig ba'ir, if you're in a city and you are leading it, because in a city there's like more people around, apparently you're not going to like ride in the city. We're going to get into some details about that in just a few minutes. So if you're leading it in the city, kona, so then you are kona. So we see that Rachuv is kona. But Rav Yehuda had said that Rachuv is not kone. Hachanami manig biraglev. No, so here also when it says Rachuv, it means that he's moving it with his feet. Yochi, if that's the case, Hainu manig, but then that's manig, right? Then Rachuv and manig are the same thing. Tregavne manig. There's two types of manig. Yochi, if that's the case, Rachuv ba'ir my time lo kani. Okay, but so if we're saying that Rachuv means that he's being manig, so then why doesn't it work in the city? Because it's not normal, it's not the way of the people to ride in the city. You lead an animal in the city, you don't ride it in the city, you lead it in the city. I guess that's what you do, meaning if you're going into the city and there's people around, it's crowded, or it's tight or whatever, you in that case you get off the animal and you lead it. You don't ride it. Apparently, I don't even drive these days, let alone ride animals around here. But apparently, this is what the Gemara says, and I'm going to go with that. Omar Lei, especially because if I don't go with it, then the Gemara is not going to make sense. So we're going to go with this. Omar Le Rav Ashi, Rav Kana says Rav Ashi Rav Kana. I don't understand. Elamiyata igbia arniki b'Shabbos. Shein darkin shel bnei adam la'gbia arniki b'Shabbos. Achinam v'lokani. I don't understand. Are kinyonim just based on like what the people normally do? So, for example, if on Shabbos you pick up a wallet, you can't pick up a wallet on Shabbos. It's muktzah. But a person does. The people don't normally do it, but he does. So he's not konet. So elamai de'ovad v'kani. Look. People don't normally pick up wallets on Shabbos, but he did. Okay, what he did, and he's kohen. Hachanami my da'avad avad v'kani. So here oichet if a person rides an animal in the city, even though the people don't normally do it, I would think that it still makes a kinyan. So ela b'mekach u'mimkar askinon ta'amarle kni k'derech shebnei adam konin. Rather, in a chinami, when it comes to metzia, you're right. Even if you find a donkey that's hefker in the city and you ride it in a chinami, maybe it's not the normal way to ride an animal in the city, to be manig an animal in the city, right? Normally you would just kind of pull it, but okay, so you rode it, beseder, it's fine. But here we're talking about mekach or mimkar, where the person who's selling the animal says, look, I want you to make a kinyan. Right? What does he say? Yeah, I want you to make a kinyan the way that people normally make a kinyan. Be normal for a change. Be normal. So make a kinyan the way that the normal people do it. And the normal people lead the animal, they don't ride the animal in the city. So, okay, fine. So that's why you'd have to lead the animal in the city, not ride it. Fine. Now, but if it was Rishus Harabim in the city, so that's where people, so then it makes sense to ride the animal. Right? It's just in like the smaller streets that you wouldn't ride it, you would lead it. But if you're in Rishus Harabim, then it would be considered normal to ride the animal. V'yadam choshevu kani, and if he's a choshev man, he's a choshev man. He's a choshev man, a choshev mensch, choshev mensch, I guess. Choshev man. What does it mean, a man and a mensch? Is it a choshev man or a choshev mensch? I feel like man? I don't know. But anyways, if he's a choshev guy, so then, even in the city, a choshev a person, he rides his animal. He's going to lead he rides it. So that would be normal for him. It would be kone v'ishahi kanya. And if it's a woman who, I guess, she wouldn't normally lead the animal, she would ride the animal. So then she would ride the animal. That would also be normal. She would be kone v'inish zilahu kani. Also, if it's a shtickle stunk, so then he. Meaning, the point is, the regular people who are sensitive are not like sunflower people, because, the people who kind of go with the flow, kind of go with the convention kind of thing, the conventional kind of people. You're riding an animal, you get to the city, to like the quiet places, you get off of the animal, and you lead it at that point. But if you're a shtickle stunk, so you stay riding on your animal and you be annoying. So in any of these scenarios where it makes sense to be riding the animal, it would make a kinyan. But otherwise, for the regular people, so in the city, it would be a kinyan if you got off the animal and you let it rather than ride it. Boy, Reb Elazar says, Reb Elazar asks a kasha. Omer lachaveru. Somebody says to his friend, interesting kasha over here. Reb Elazar asks a kasha. Omer lachaveru. A fellow says to his friend, Mishoch behema zo. So, if Shimon says to Ruvain, Mishoch behemazo, pull this animal, liknos kelim she'aleh, in order to be kone the vessels that are on it. So you have a donkey, on top of the donkey there's some vessels. Shimon says to Ruvain, Ruvain, pull the donkey in order to be kone the vessels. Now you're not being koned with the donkey, just the vessels. Mao, what's the halach? Likno. So now the Gemara asks kind of a funny question. Liknos mi omer le knei. But wait, 1 second. How could Reuven possibly, in the first place, be koned in this manner? Because Shimon never made it clear that he intends to be makne these vessels to Reuven. All he said is like, pull the animal in order to be kone these vessels. But Reuven would only be able to be kone the vessels if Shimon actually wanted to be makne the vessels to Reuven. And he didn't actually say to Reuven, I want to be makne the vessels to you. He just said, pull the animal in order to be kone the vessels. But who says that that's actually effective? So, Ela mishoch behemazo uknei kelim shaleh amal. Okay, rather, if Shimon says to Reuven, pull this animal, and by doing so, be kone my vessels, and they will now belong to you. Does that work? Can pulling an animal, now you're not going to be kone the animal, but by pulling the animal, can Ruvain be kone the vessels in this manner? Does pulling the animal work as an effective way to be kone the vessels or not? But now the interesting thing is that the underlying assumption here was that if Shimon would have said to Ruvain, pull the animal, make a kinyan meshicha on the animal, and by being kone the animal, Mimele, you'll be kone the vessels. Like that seems to be the assumption. Right? We seem to be taking that for granted. That certainly if Shimon would have said to Ruvain, pull the animal, make a kinyan meshicha on the animal, and then Mimele, you'll be kone the vessels. But that's not what he's asking. What he's asking is a different question, which is, pull the animal, do not be kone the animal, just be kone the vessels that are on the animal. Would that work? Now, the assumption is that in the prior scenario, if Shimon would say to Ruvain, pull the animal, be kone the animal, and also be kone the vessels, it would work because of a chotzer. That the animal would be considered like a chotzer, and the vessels are like in the chotzer. And you're being kone the animal, and you're also being kone the vessels that are on the animal in the chotzer. The animal serving as a chotzer. So Amar Rava, but Rava questions this. But would that really work? If Shimon would have said to Ruvain, pull the animal, be kone the animal, and also be kone the vessels that are on the animal, since the animal would be considered a chotzer and the vessels would be considered in the chotzer, and by being kone the chotzer, being kone the vessels. But chotzer ma'alechasi. But the animal is a moving chotzer, v'chotzer ma'aleches lo kana. And a moving chotzer cannot make an effective, is not considered a chotzer that could be kone. B'chitema, and if you're going to say kishe amda, well, yeah, but we're talking about when the animal was no longer moving, it would be kone the items. But kol she'ilu mahalech lo kana, omid v'yoshev lo kana. But as we've learned in the past, that anything that if when it's moving is not kone, so also when it's stationary it is not kone. Just because it's stopped doesn't all of a sudden make it kone. The hilchisa bichfusa. But we're talking about where the animal was tied up. So we're talking about where the animal was tied up. So because the animal was tied up, so it wasn't actually able to move. Okay, and that is why we can assume that since the animal can't move, if you have the vessels on the animal and you pull the animal and you're kone the animal b'meshicha, then the animal can also serve as a chotzer, and you would oichet be kone the kalim. I guess once it's right, I guess it can't move, right? I think that's the point, right? Since it can't move, so if you could be kone I think you would still be able to be kone the animal b'meshicha. Why not? Just pull it. So if you'd be kone the animal b'meshicha, so then you would be kone the animal, and Memeli would oichet be kone the vessels that were on it. And then the question is, but what if? And then that was Eliezer's question. That was Rabbi Elazar's. I think Rabbi Elazar, right? That was Rabbi Elazar's question. But what if he said, don't be kone the animal, just be kone the vessels? And it doesn't seem like we answer that question. Okay. Amrulei v'papa v'vuna b'eder v'yishua l'rave. So papa v'vuna b'eder v'yishua to rave. Elamiata oyu mahalik basvina. What if a person is traveling on a boat and the boat is moving? V'kavzu dogim v'naflu l'soch hasvina, and then the fish jump into the boat. What do we say? Well, the boat is moving. Therefore, it's a moving chotzer, and therefore it can't be kone the fish. So So if it says actually, the boat is stationary. the boat isn't going nowhere. It's staying there. It's the water that's moving. And the water is moving the boat, but the boat itself isn't doing anything. And therefore the boat is stationary, and therefore the fish that fall in the boat the boat could be calling the fish. I feel like it's a shtickle like Albert Einstein over here, a shtickle relativity, right? What's moving? Is it the boat that's moving? Is it the water that's moving? Can you say relativity over here? Probably. Everything's relative, right? What if you have a woman, a wife, who's walking Rishus Harabim, v'zark la get l'socheka or l'soch kalto, and the husband throws a writ of divorce into her lap or into her basket, I guess that's like on her head. So what are you going to say, that she's not divorced? So Amalei, so who is this? So Rav Ashi responds, Kalta menachnaicha v'idika mas misagya mitusa. No, here Oichit, the basket isn't moving. She's moving. She's the one who's walking. The basket isn't going nowhere. So therefore, she would be divorced. Friends, that was the test of Masechta BavaMetzia Shnaikis. I think that was daf test, right? And my oh my, we really did like daf test and a half. Jews, we have half an hour still to go. Oh, we discussed Shmuel, who had said that there's a difference between Rachuv and Manig. That Manig would be Koneb, Rachuv would be not. But then we talked about that there could be even scenarios of Rachuv where he's like Taka kicking it, making it move, and then that Taka would be Koneb. And we talked about all sorts of things. We even got into like Kin and Chotzers at the end over there. Some pretty interesting stuff. Peace out.